Welcome to Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Ekiyor. Today, we are talking with a seasoned leader in special education, Dr. Woody, who has dedicated her career to supporting students with diverse needs in schools. We will explore the challenges of ADHD in the classroom and practical strategies to create more inclusive schools. Thank you, Dr. Woody, for accepting our invitation to share your expertise. Could you share the story behind your career choices?
No problem, Sarah. First of all, thank you for having me. When I think about my career path, it went through a lot of changes. My first semester in college, I changed my major 5 times. My father told me, listen, little girl, your mom and I are committed to providing you a good education, but we only signed up for 4 years of college. So stop changing your major because you're going to be there longer. And,
Yeah.
daddy, a man of wisdom, he knew
Mhm.
exactly what to say to me and how to say. After I changed my major the last time, I changed it back to education where I had started.
Mm.
Had a dual major of communication, journalism, and education.
Sure.
Just couldn't choose between the two, but it fit. It really complemented itself and it complemented everything that I wanted to do. Finished undergrad, and my love of teaching actually started in undergrad. I was always helping my friends and my colleagues in regards to just being able to do assignments. I love to, if a professor gave us 3 things to do, I was the kind of person I like to do 5. I wanted to go a little bit more and beyond. And then I wanted to teach others how to go a little bit more and beyond. But also, whatever they were submitting, to really put their heart into it and to learn themselves as a learner so that they can present their best product.
Mm.
Um, and so that became very interesting. During undergrad, went and worked at a lot of community centers, tutoring little people, which
Mm.
was to me very rewarding. It
Mm.
wasn't a position I was paid for. In all honesty, I was fine with that because
Mm.
I believe that when you're working with children, children really give you this sense of accomplishment because they need what you're providing. That really made me feel not only good about what I was doing, but that I was helping the next generation. And
Mm.
so that is a love of mine that has lasted these 26 years. I'm looking forward to taking me even 26 years down the path as well.
That's interesting. Most times, when you meet people who are in love with what they do, it's out there. I've seen you and always wondered. Now I
you
know
know.
where the passion is from. We've always been so focused on talking about ADHD and how it does manifest in the classroom, strategies, and all that. We've never had the opportunity or the honor of having somebody who can actually talk about the New York State regulations. How does these regs support our students? Why are they in place, and what kind of support were they intended for our students?
I find it interesting, Dr. Ekiyor, that we often have to have regulations because there's a population of people being harmed. Regulations come about to make the playing field level. Oftentimes, students, we need a level playing field because everyone is not coming into school at the same level. And so, with that said, when you even think about little preschoolers at that level, our little ones are coming into daycares and UPK programs, and they don't recognize letters, numbers, colors, shapes. It behooves us to have regulations in place that we can meet children where they are to take them where they need to be. So, having said that, when we think about regulations in New York State, I think first and foremost about IDEA right out the gate. That was a regulation that was passed in 1975. And the whole premise of IDA is to make sure that we're providing special education services to children with disabilities. How do we know they have disabilities? Any teacher working with a child as they are providing instruction, he or she will see that little one is having some difficulty obtaining the lesson, learning, mastering it. So we begin to look at little people individually, as we should, and determine, do they need, as most schools call, extra help? And that's where special education comes in. So with IDA, requires that children we believe have disabilities receive appropriate evaluation to determine if they're eligible for special education services. With IDA, all of our students should have access to a free and appropriate education. In special education, we use a lot of acronyms, sir.
Mhm.
So you'll hear FAPE, and that's the free and appropriate education. All of our children are afforded that. With IDA, our little ones, if they qualify for services, are guaranteed individualized instruction if they should need it. Also, we can talk about the different groupings within special education and what that looks like. But keep in mind, those services are there to meet the child's unique needs. Another component of IDA is that children with disabilities should, at every point, be able to receive their instruction in the least restrictive learning environment. That's key. Ability that we think, oh, automatically they should be placed in a special class. That is not the case. Least restrictive in 1973, it came from the Rehabilitation Act. And with that regulation, it requires all schools to be able to offer accommodations for students who are eligible and those students who have disabilities. The purpose, again, for Section 504 is to do what? To level the playing field for children who have disabilities so that they can be a part of programs and activities with their peers who are non-disabled. So we wanted to make sure that we have supports in the classrooms for all children, regardless of disabilities.
This is quite educating. You were using the word IDEA,
Mm-hmm.
the acronym.
Mm-hmm.
So, what does that acronym stands for? Parents who are listening and don't understand that.
So that came out of a regulation. IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I often share with my parents, having been a coordinator of preschool services
Mhm.
for school age, elementary, primary, intermediate, middle school, and high
Mhm.
school, I always share with my parents if you believe that your child is having great difficulty learning, as you always have a right to refer your child to special education so that your child will be evaluated to determine if he or she will require some services that will help them in the classroom.
Mhm.
I think when we're working with parents, we should, at every turn, be clear and to work with parents so that if
Mhm.
parents know their rights, then they can clearly advocate for their children.
Yes.
We have to understand from day one that parents are not just the parents of the children that we suspect have a disability. Our
Mhm.
parents are our partners. And we
Mhm.
have to show that, we have to mean that, and they have to be brought to the table, not as a sit and get, but as a participant, as a stakeholder to advocate for the future of their children.
Let's look at students with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. What are the specific services or accommodations that are commonly provided for students with ADHD under state guidelines?
Every school district has a continuum of services. So it depends on what school district you're in. When we talk about the least restrictive, and we'll start with the least restrictive and then work our way to the more restrictive. The least restrictive in a given district may have consult teacher service, which is a general education classroom with a special education teacher and a gen ed teacher working together to meet the needs of all the children in the classroom. But that special education teacher is there to support the children with a disability. So in most districts, that's the least restrictive. Next to that, you may get into another class setting on the continuum that may have been referred to as a blended classroom or an integrated classroom. And again, that's a general education teacher and a special education teacher working together all day. Oftentimes in the consult model, it may be half a day or subject specific, but in an integrated, it's both of the adults working all day together. When you move along the continuum, you get into a more restrictive learning environment that would entail the special class. When I look at a student with ADHD, again, we're always going to err. on the side that's best for the child, looking at the least restrictive learning environment. Once a child has been placed according to their needs, when we talk about accommodations, a lot of the accommodations we make for students should be a part of what I call good first teaching. Flexible seating. It shouldn't require a child to be diagnosed with ADHD in order to have flexible seating. Every child can't sit still for a certain amount of time. They may need to move or stand because you still have their attention. They just need to stand. Or they may need to use a footrest or a seat cushion. That's one type of accommodation. We also need to look at the spacing. And oftentimes, a child with ADHD may need a little bit more workspace, but then so does many children. So that is an accommodation that should be a part of good first teaching where appropriate. However, if a child has an IEP, these are the things we need to look at. We also need to accommodate that one if he or she needs a quiet workspace. Because when we talk about a child with ADHD, the first thing we hear where they're inattentive, they're not paying attention. And what inattentiveness may look like for this child, it may be different for this child, but they're both quote unquote not paying attention. I could be looking at you as I'm doing right now, Dr. E, and you may think, oh, eyes on me, she's listening, but my mind can be elsewhere. So we shouldn't take these things for granted just because eyes on me, you're listening. That's not the case. The best way to know what our kids need is to ask our kids. That's first and foremost, because that's a part of the accommodations, asking them what they need. A lot of visuals should also be recommended, but again, to me, that's a part of good first teaching. A written schedule that is posted every day, and not just visuals, sometimes often needing to be color coded. So our kids know we're going from this, we were doing this work in math on yellow. Now we're going to move over to science, and science is everything in orange. And then when we're done with science, oh, I know we're now moving into social study, and that's everything that's in green, so on and so forth. So we have to have the child in mind and also his or her learning ability in order to really accommodate for their needs. A lot of children with ADHD, as do most children, really struggle with organization. At the end of the day, I wanted them to be successful. I wanted them to learn about organization, and I wanted them to learn about themselves as learners. We look at the accommodations again, as you invite the students to the table, they can tell you. I was able to model organization skills with them, being able to show them how to take notes, how to organize their notebooks, how to work with a partner so that they had a buddy to learn with, to grow with. That's also important. Learning. And I'm going to tell you, for me, learning my own learning style many, many years ago, I am both auditory and visual. And I can't, one isn't stronger than the other. Together, they are very impacting in my life. So I always, whenever I provide instructions for anyone, I am always not telling them verbally, but I'm also demonstrating it because I know that's how I learn, for quality and not necessarily quantity. Whatever is being taught, we can minimize the number of questions. We can always implement it be a story or a unit in social studies, provide during the lesson to ask quick questions. And get feedback from the students, because that way you'll be able to garner that they are on this road traveling with you and that you haven't lost any passengers along the way.
Probably. Let's talk about our parents. How can parents and schools work together to ensure that students with ADHD get the support they need?
I will tell you, Dr. E, that first and foremost, paramount to any relationship is communication. First and foremost, we have to be able to not only give feedback to parents and our students, but allow parents and students to give us feedback in regards to how instruction is going. So communication is important. And when we communicate to parents, we need to communicate not just about the naughty behaviors, but about the positive as well. When we're talking about working with parents, we got to talk about building relationships. We also have to understand that the parent is just as much an advocate for their child as is the teacher. with in mind that we're both working towards the common goal, ensuring that this student is receiving a good, solid education. So when you're working with parents, you want to work on strengthening your communication. You want to be sensitive to the needs of the student, as well as be sensitive to the needs of the parent. Keep in mind, when you're telling a parent that their perfect little being isn't so perfect, that message must be delivered with compassion, awareness that where that child is at this moment, this snapshot in time, this is not where this child will always be. And that's what we have to understand. We engage with parents, we want to be able to provide them with good, solid support, explain the instruction that is going forth, talk to the parent, recognize I know how your child learns. In my class, this is what he or she needs. This is what I provide. Tell me, when your child is at home doing homework, where are they doing their homework? What do you see them really concentrating? What supports do you provide? We want to make sure we tell the parents about what happened in the classroom so the parents can mirror that same learning environment at home. That communication is key so that parents have a good understanding of what's happening in that classroom 6 hours a day so it can be duplicated at home so that we're consistency is everything. We need to be consistent with our interactions and our teaching methods, and then encourage parents to be consistent at home because we want our kids to be able to receive much of the same in both environments so that they can learn. We want to make sure that as an educator, we're not only talking to them about the assignments and the tasks that their little ones must do every day, but we want to show the parents and demonstrate to them things that they can do to support their little one while they're at home. That's key. In the classroom, as an educator, I provided time for breaks. And kids will need that at home as well. We want to use the same language. We want to use the same mindset when a child is learning because even though it's homework and they're doing homework at home, it is still an extension of the lesson. Because it's an extension of the lesson, I like to think that the same modality or the methodologies used in the classroom should also be used at home for consistency. That's important.
Yes, thank you. I've met parents, I've interviewed parents at times who say they are told by their primary care physicians that their kids have ADHD, but nobody actually takes time to sit down with them and say, this is what it looks like, this is what you should be expecting, and these are things you can do. I don't know whether you've experienced that. If you have, what has always been your advice to such parents?
Well, I will tell you, Dr. E, first and foremost, when parents have referred their child and their child is being classified. And so,
Mm,
because we're talking about ADHD, we know when we talk about the 13 classifications, a student with ADHD will qualify for a classification of a student with other health impairment.
mhm,
First, I always tell parents, first of all, coming into the arena of special education, that special education should never be a parking lot. Your
mhm,
child should not be placed in special ed and remain.
mhm,
If we do our job, the parents work with us and do their job, we should actually see their child begin to soar. We should see those children take off and continue to go. So that's first and foremost. What I share with parents based on the classification, I like to share with parents what you should anticipate when it comes to your child's learning style. Oftentimes, when children are diagnosed, parents are often told, medicate, medicate. My doctorate is in education. I'm not an MD. So I'm clear to let parents know I am
yeah,
not a proponent for medication. That's your decision.
mhm,
If you want to medicate, that's your decision. If you do not, that too is your decision. However, as a practitioner, I am here to work with you and your child, especially if a child has behaviors that others have recommended medication, then I need to come through with some strategies to help the parent that helps the child.
mhm,
I like to share with parents what we will perceive to be happening with the student, the inattentiveness, the impulsivity, what that looks like. And then I like to talk about strategies and how to address it. I've never been the type of practitioner in a classroom. I don't run a traditional classroom. Never have. And as long as there's breath in my body and I have a complete understanding of what kids need, I never will. Because when we talk about education, there's not really much traditional about it. Everybody's coming from different arenas and having different needs. You may see students sitting at a desk. You may see students sitting on a beanbag. But you know what you will see? You will see learning. You will see learning in that community because I've developed the understanding of what is necessary. I would always invite my parents in. And most times parents would say, well, if my child see me, they may stop working. No problem. That's why I got that whole glass right there in my door. Feel free to look in and see your child. I am fine with that because anything that happens in here, I want you to be a part of it. If I create a learning environment that is inclusive for your children, then it's also inclusive for you.
Oh.
If you're my partner and a stakeholder in this educational journey with your child, you must have a seat at the table.
Now, are there any recent changes or initiatives in New York State that is aimed at improving the support for students with ADHD that you're aware of?
New York State is looking more holistically that we have children across the board that have needs. So it really comes down to the knowledge of the practitioners. The governor of New York recently put forth a couple of initiatives where she was looking to enhance the support in regards to post secondary for
Mhm.
students that have graduated, looking at those students with disabilities post secondary and how they can really do well after graduation. She's looking to make some proposals to support or increase support for these individuals in certain workplaces. And I know there's a great emphasis on working with those who have graduated in the healthcare system to support them. That's admirable. I love that. I'm always concerned about once our students leave us, what is life for them? What is it like for them? Are they able to go into a community college and do well? Oftentimes, I often hear that once they graduate, really don't do well because the support that they receive in K 12 does not mirror the support they receive post secondary.
Mhm.
I think New York State recognizes that. They are developing some programs, but a lot of that, sir, actually start at the 9-12 with the transition. The transition plans are important. And it shouldn't be the focus of how we transition them from ending with us and then dropping them outside. Theoretically, we have to look more, I think we have to be a little bit more creative in what that's going to look like for students because I don't ever want a child to be considered out of sight, out of mind.
Mhm.
Their future is just important to me at age 25 as it was when they started their educational career at the age of 3 or 4. So I am confident that New York State has this on their radar. But if there are any specific initiatives at this point, I haven't heard anything that is separate for our students who have ADHD.
Good. Now, I am going to throw this in about training.
Mhm.
I don't know from your experience if educators, paraprofessionals, TAs, even administrators, if they are really having specific and targeted training on some of these diagnoses, like autism, ADHD. Have you experienced that kind of training where they say, oh, this is specifically for ADHD, so that people at least understand who is sitting in front of them before they start even educating them?
I recall going through those teacher prep programs where when we talked about students with disabilities,
Mhm,
we looked at students with autism.
mhm,
We looked at students back then, students who may have been classified as mental retardation. We now have a cleaner and palatable classification that we use now. We've replaced MR. But the concentration then was not specifically on students with ADHD. Let me say it this way: those students with ADHD got a chapter in the book, and that was about it. Now I think the teacher prep programs are doing much better with not just highlighting the different diagnoses that lead to the different classifications, but they're actually looking more specifically at them. Now, does that transition into effective training? Well, that depends. And sadly, it depends upon the knowledge base of the practitioners or the administrators that have a good understanding of the needs of a child with ADHD, the needs of a child that is on the spectrum. If they have a good understanding, then the training will more or less coincide and really help practitioners to be more successful in the classroom when working with said students. But if your question is, do we have effective training? Is it understood that this needs to be the focus? It comes down to what you know. Based on what you know, then you will give credence to it so that others are trained based off of what you know in your population. And that's the other piece. Because in special education, based on a child being ADHD or even a student having autism, oftentimes students with autism are often placed in a setting with other students with autism. You rarely find a student on the spectrum in a consult teacher class. Maybe more so now, but certainly not in the past, because we were afraid of what we didn't know. And that's the best way of saying it. So, do I think our training programs, even at the teacher prep level, at the colleges, and of course, moving into the school districts and providing more effective professional development opportunities? Absolutely. Can we do better? Yes. Should we do better? Yes. Why? Because the various needs of our students is constantly changing.
Yes.
And we have to change with them. We
Mhm.
can't be stagnant and only do things this way that fits in this little box when our students have needs that are at a triangle.
Mhm.
And a triangle, a square don't fit into a triangle. If it
Mhm.
does, and when I say it that way, it may fit in there, but it doesn't cover that triangle.
Mhm.
So, whatever size we use, we have to ensure that we're using enough support to cover the needs of
Mhm.
each child.
Thank you. It's very important that we understand that it's not just understanding ADHD in theory. Can you feel it? Can you recognize it? Can you touch it? Can you know when you're confronted with it? If kill or you have that training, how prepared are you proactively
Mhm.
to make sure this doesn't end up with referrals around behavior and punitive measures?
Exactly.
Um, I'm so
Exactly.
appreciative of your presence. Thank you so much. I know you've given us so much time. One last opportunity. Is there something you would want to share with parents, educators, policymakers, something that you just want to say, hey, if somebody's listening
Mhm. Well,
that
two
might
things.
benefit these kids?
Two things, and I would really like to piggyback off of what you just said
Mhm,
before you gave me that question.
mhm,
It's imperative, again, that we understand the needs of children. And
mhm.
when we talk about the needs of children, I'm talking about the whole child.
Yes.
That's important. When we look at children, we are to look at them first and foremost as individuals with needs that we say that we can meet. If I can share anything with parents, with any of the stakeholders, policymakers, whomever is listening, please understand that in the world of education, everything that you need to know will not be found in a book.
Mhm,
We must have boots on the ground. When you look at a classroom, our first line of defense, the first soldiers in battle, are the teachers. Teachers provide instruction, but they're also there to help shape the minds and the learning styles and the skill set of our future. So that's key. So when we talk about what we need to do, we need to work together. We, practitioners, parents, policymakers, those in authority and teacher prep at colleges, we all need to understand the needs of the children that we're educating today. Because for someone who has been in on this career journey for 26 years, the kids that I have encountered now are not the children from 5 years ago, are not the children from 10 years ago, are not the same as the children 15, 20 years ago. Their needs are ever changing. And we, as educators who are supposed to be progressive, we also need to change as well in order to meet the needs of children.
Thank you again for being here and for taking this time to share your expertise. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And Dr. E, from one practitioner to the next, having been in your classrooms in time past, I believe you are a excellent educator. And I know with anything and everything you do, you always do it with the child in mind.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate you. That's very kind of you. So that's it for today's episode of Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed Talks. A big thank you to our guests for our insight and to you for tuning in. If you found this helpful, share it, subscribe for more conversations like this. Until next time, I'm Dr. Stanley Ekiyor. Take care.